for more people to start coming in. And I don't know, let's see. I'm going to say, as people are coming in, if you want to tell us where you're from, where you're at, I'm going to go ahead and start it here. So let's go. Where are you guys tuning in from? Hey, Jeannie's in SoCal with Chaili.
Love it.
Robin in Oakland. Lodi, very nice. That you need for the new normal. So over the past year, the global pandemic has redefined what mental and physical wellness means to us. Routines are disrupted and many people began to work from home, as we all know, about this time last year. And it left so many of us, myself included, feeling just depleted, burnt out. 4 in 10 Americans say it affected their physical health, and 53% say it negatively affected their mental well-being. In 2021, it is time to refill the tank, and that's why we're here today. From the lockdown limits that inspired creativity and community through technology to the therapeutic breakthroughs that provided solace amid COVID-19, the future of more accessible wellness tools is looking brighter for 2021. So during this webinar, we will talk with Chaili Trentham, Suzy Lewis, and Tiffany Loggins to discuss how wellness evolved, as well as the emerging trends to help you meet your wellness goals in this crazy world of new normal. So today's panelists, I'll quickly run through a very brief bio. We've got Suzy Lewis. You want to wave for us?
Hey, everybody.
Suzy is a master certified health coach who is passionate about helping business professionals and families who lead fast-paced lives transform their health through simple nutrition and lifestyle. And then we have Tiffany Loggins. Would you wave for us?
Hello.
Tiffany is a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in helping underrepresented groups cope with minority stress, strengthening allyship and connection through culturally sensitive programming to promote education on diversity, inclusion, and enhancing general mental health, wellness, and productivity. By addressing stressors at both the individual and the societal levels. And then we also have Chaili Trentham. Wave for us, please. With a master's degree in leadership development and certifications in whole and intentional leader development and design thinking for innovation, Chaili's approach empowers leaders to grow in their leadership capacity and ability to bring their individual strengths to every project they're involved with. Thank you guys so very much for being part of this today. And so we're going to jump right in. Quarantines, lockdowns, self-imposed isolation have pushed tens of millions around the world to work from home, as we know. In fact, nearly 42% of the labor force moved to a fully remote setup, and an estimated 30% could be home-based through the end of 2021. Wow. While the flexibility has been a positive for some, it has proved challenging for many others. So I'm going to turn this to Chaili. Chaili, what tips do you have for people to stay healthy and moving while they're working from home?
So we've been considering what work and life alignment looks like for years now in the leadership space, right? And coming from this leadership development perspective, I kind of love that I'm getting this question, because this idea of bringing well-being into the workplace has always been a priority, but this past year has accelerated how leaders are embracing this idea at an organizational level and with immediacy, right? We had to make that pivot quick in our organizations and in our homes as we brought work home with us. And so we know that keeping employees healthy and moving is directly correlated to higher performance at work. But for the first time, I think as leaders, we've had to shift our perspective of how do we actively help our teams do this, right? So here are some of my tips for staying healthy and moving while working from home, because obviously working is important, right? And getting that done, but we know that we need to come alongside our teams and help them move. So my perspective is this: set intention daily. What will you set out to do today? And how will you model that as a leader and help your teams to set those intentions as well, considering this at all levels of our leadership. So not just work tasks, but will you take a 5-minute walk in between calls? Will you get up and do some jumps, when you have a free moment, just to get your brain moving and get yourself ready to transition into the next activity? Will you as a leader tell your team, hey, we're going to get up and do this quick movement together. We're going to have a 30-second dance party if everybody's able. By setting these daily intentions, we're building long-lasting positive habits as leaders. And it starts, like I said, with you modeling that integration of prioritizing work. Hey, we're going to dig in and do this, when it comes to what we have to get done in the workplace as a team, but we also are going to support one another's well-being. So that's my number one tip, is pick daily intentions and then pick top 3 goals. I tell leaders all the time, we have to help our remote teams prioritize their workload. And we start with 3. And that's been something that has been so crucial in helping people narrow in and focus on what needs to get done. And I tell people, take one of those and make one of those a movement related activity. So it's not just top 3 priorities of this is my workload and this is what I need to get done. It's this is my workload and it's what I need to get done. And a part of that is showing up as my best self. And so I'm going to prioritize a healthy goal, a movement goal, something that allows me to put my well-being first as a leader, right? So that's kind of my tip, is just make it happen, integrate it, look at work-life balance as an opportunity to really do this well and to lead an integrated leadership lifestyle.
I love that, because I fully believe that even as individuals, unless we're full ourselves, unless we feel good for ourselves, we're not any good to other people. So we have to fill up our own tank before we can actually be valuable and useful to the greater society. So I really, really appreciate that. And I recently got to sit in on a group health talk that you did for one of our clients, and I left there with so many tips, and it was really interesting. In the chat, as just employees were chatting the whole time about different things that all the things you just hit on. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to move on to Suzy. In mid-March 2020, the pandemic brought all of our events to an abrupt halt, but there was a silver lining. A new trend of virtual meetings and events. How we gather is just taking on a completely new meaning. So Suzy, I see you're in your kitchen right now, which I love.
I am.
Cooking classes from your kitchen. Can you tell us about the activities that you took virtual? What aspects of the virtual do you appreciate that, say, you weren't able to do when we were actually on site?
Absolutely. I actually just see so many benefits to this transition of working at home for people. And I agree that it's a trend that's not going to just go away when we get vaccinated or all those things go away. I like to mention too, although we want to be washing our hands, wearing our masks, staying 6 feet apart, doing all of that stuff, we also really, really need to be taking care of our health, because all of the trends that used to be there, like heart disease, like cancer, and all of these things that affect our body, they're still there. And it scares me a little bit to think about, when we look back on this period of time, some of the health trends look a little bit scary, especially when they come to nutrition. So my influence in the way of helping employees and business leaders with nutrition and with their health has actually, the door just opened wider, because I'm able to reach out to more people. I think it's actually a benefit for people to be able to do cooking classes, which mainly I do cooking classes, and they are a lot of times at home cooking alongside with me. So it's not like they're just, sitting back watching a show or looking at something at work. For the most part, we're at home. And so I love that I actually get to teach people in their space. And it really, I think that there's a piece of that some of the privacy is broken down. You get to see me in my kitchen. This is my space. You get to see how it's actually done. The real, where the rubber meets the road to your wellness is, like Chaili said, getting that exercise in, getting the movement piece in. It's also cooking healthy food. So for me, one of the big benefits of this challenging, in some ways challenging time has been that those barriers are coming down, where it's more accessible than ever. It's also at the forefront of everyone's mind, I think, to just make sure our health is taken care of. And kudos to these companies that have worked with us at Fit Pros to really bring this amazing wellness service to their employees. That's your biggest asset, is your employees. You've got this great talent that you've cultivated, and it just creates a wonderful community. That's what I've seen on my cooking demos, is just people getting together, having fun, being creative, all that good stuff. Long answer to your question there.
Oh, completely agree. I mean, you nailed it. You nailed it, because like you said, our privacy walls have been broken down. And quite frankly, I appreciate that, because, for a long time, in the corporations that have been around for a really long time, they kept trying to keep work and life separate, and it's just not possible. And we start, as well-being in the workplace started to pick up over years, companies really started to realize that. But now it's more than ever, we are in each other's homes. And so that personal touch is now there. And so, so thank you, Suzy. That was perfect. And that really leads really nicely into, our personal well-being, our mental well-being. Tiffany, what you're going to share, it's so near and dear to my heart, because I know so many people, that experienced deep depression last year. And I would love to kind of turn to you and, some stats behind it, and you would know this, but more than 1 in 3 adults have experienced conditions like anxiety, depression, and then the pandemic has only made these conditions worse. So in mid-July, more than half of all adults in the US reported that their mental health was negatively impacted by COVID. So Tiffany, what are some signs and symptoms of mental health concerns that that we should take notice of, or more importantly, what can employers or employees recognize that their team is going through?
Yeah, I think this is really important. We know the symptoms of mental health is going to vary widely. Individuals are going to experience it differently, but there are signs that people may be able to notice either in themselves, their employees, or people that they're living with, that we know occur, because we know what happens when we have an overactive nervous system, or we're overwhelmed by daily stressors or trauma and all of the uncertainty that we've been experiencing. In lay terms, our nervous system has really been evolved to manage acute stressors, right? We experience that fight or flight response, and we're experiencing this all the time, right? And how this has evolved is it helps mediate our ability to problem solve and confront stressors head on. But unfortunately, especially in 2020, the system has been kicked in overdrive. We don't get any rest or relaxation from it. And it's honestly hasn't really been evolved to manage the chronic stress that we see in the 21st century, right? We're worried about the pandemic, we're worried about work, finances, relationships, and there's a lot of uncertainty in our lives, right? And so as a result, there's been this mix match between how our bodies have evolved to handle stress and the chronic daily stressors that we experience all the time. And as a result, we're seeing now more than ever, mental health issues, chronic issues, physical health, they're 10 times more common in this generation than there ever has been. And so some of the things that people might notice just individually might be changes in their body around like increased headaches, body tension, skin problems, so like acne or very dry skin. Women might notice some hormonal issues as far as like menstrual changes. And I think at work, what people will start to notice is they're a lot more forgetful, they're not as productive, they have difficulty concentrating. And there might also be a lack of energy or fatigue. So if you're waking up in the morning, you're feeling like, wow, I slept 8 hours, but I feel like I slept 2 hours, or you're relying heavily on sugar and caffeine to get you throughout the day, that can also be a sign that there's something going on. Another thing that I hear patients talk a lot about is gastro issues. So if you're starting to have stomach issues, one of the things we know is when your body is stressed, digestion is essentially shut down, meaning that your body prioritizes fighting off stressors in your life. So it's not really worried about digestion. So people will notice that they are having some changes in their stomach, nausea. They might notice some appetite changes, which we've seen in the pandemic, right? People were struggling with emotional eating. You're at home all the time, you're bored, you're feeling anxious. So you might notice some changes in your appetite as far as like weight loss and weight gain. Sleep issues, people not being able to sleep. Our routine has been completely thrown off. And as a result of a lot of these physical symptoms that people are experiencing, you start to develop chronic health issues. So I definitely encourage people to check in with their PCP and get a wellness check, especially after the year that we had. But another thing that happens is the reason why people come and see me is unhealthy coping mechanisms, right? Increased use of alcohol and drugs. So substance abuse is through the roof. Social media usage as well. And you might start to notice some changes in your productivity at work. You might be coming to meetings a little bit later. You might notice that you aren't doing your work. You're having difficulty concentrating, and increased hopelessness and apathy. So people might notice an anhedonia. So the things that you found pleasurable, and especially in quarantine, a lot of those things you're not able to do, but now you all of a sudden have no interest or pleasure in it. Withdrawing or social isolation is another kind of thing to think about, which we've seen in quarantine, you can't see people as much. But if you're noticing you're not, talking with your friends, texting or reaching out or doing those Zoom family phone calls, kind of checking in with yourself around what could be going on. And then one of the other things that I think people don't know about, which is kind of a less known symptom of depression, is irritability and agitation. If you're finding yourself just feeling a lot more irritability, edginess, you're more short with your loved ones, it could be that there's something going on. And for people to realize that these signs and symptoms is really your body's way of trying to communicate to you that something is wrong. But I think we have a tendency to ignore, work harder, and find other unhealthy coping mechanisms to kind of mask them.
Wow. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I could see all three. We're just like, yep, yeah, nodding the whole time. Everything you just said, it's, I think we all probably experienced some form of that at some time, during this, and last year was especially heavier, but I think throughout our entire lives, we go through these phases of, I might not talk to friends for a long time. And, I think you just called out something really great is switch that. If you don't hear from your friends for a really long time, check on them because they might be going through something. And so thank you for all of that knowledge of what to look out for. Really appreciate that. I do have another question for you, but I'll come back, come right back to you. I'm going to go back to Chaili, excuse me. In a recent survey of about, I think it was 7,000 professionals, they found that 73% of the workers are burned out. And 27% report that it's due to no separation between the work and the life, like we were talking about before. When you work from home, it can be challenging to keep your work life separate from your personal life. I know my cat just tried to jump on my lap. Even more so when everyone in your household is home at the same time too. Things are starting to pick back up. Kids are going back to school, but I think that's I really believe that a lot of our clients are still allowing their employees to work from home permanently. My husband's company decided that, that's fine. You guys can work from home permanently. So what are your suggestions when you're working from home? Like, we would just love a little bit detail about how to keep those things separate, but yet respect each other.
Right. Well, I think you said it earlier there's no separation anymore, right? Because we're doing it all at once. I mean, Sheryl Sandberg even said early on in the pandemic, she said, women are now working the double shift, right? Because we were navigating, not only switching to a remote workplace, but I mean, in the beginning of the pandemic, I would have my computer here for my Zoom calls with snacks lined up so that when my 3 and 4-year-old sons walked up, I would just hand them the next snack and keep them quiet and send them out of the room. And so it was this transition of not only are we doing everything at once and there's no separation, but everything is new. Everything is unknown. Everything is uncertain down to when will my kids maybe pop into the room, and is my husband on a call too? And so is he available? And so it's all of this unknown pushes us into this place where we may have the exact same workload that we had a year ago, but it looks so different because that lack of separation, and workload is one of the top reasons we hit burnout. Is when our work intensity increases, then we have those feelings of burnout, that we are emotionally exhausted, we feel less efficient, less productive. And so we really have to be aware of that. I mean, how Tiffany's talking about these warning signs, right? That even when she talks about irritability with your partner, I'm like, yes, I have experienced that in the last year quite a few times, because we're all working in the same house. And so really, when we look at this idea of separating, I think we have to shift our mindset and how we frame this a little bit, and reframe differently to, again, look at work-life alignment. And I sometimes tell people this is a teeter-totter, and on one side is your work and on one side is your life. And the goal of a teeter-totter is not balance. I truly believe that work-life balance is a myth for the modern leader. So the goal is not to be suspended in the air on a teeter-totter. The goal is movement, right, with your partner on the other side. And so when we look at work and life that way, that it is this constant movement, it's this being in motion and allowing flexibility to move from one side to another, we have the opportunity to reframe and say, it's more about being tethered and being aligned when those things are off balance, right? And so my tip is, find new rhythms that support work when you need to focus on work, and support life when you need to focus on life, and recognize that those are always going to be somewhat competing. And when we begin to see that alignment, we can say it's not so much about the separation, it's about doing it all as best as we can. We can't do it all perfectly. We only have 100% to give to both of those sides. But when this side is requiring 80%, then what can we adjust here to give 20, and vice versa? So I say that something to do in this season is to take a life audit, like look at what you need right now, and be open and transparent with the people around you, with your support system, with your community, for me, it was with family, and saying, I need some help with the kids. I still have to work, and I need some help in what that looks like. And when we begin to let people into this process with us, we have the opportunity to, how I talked about focus earlier, we have an opportunity to look and focus in on the things that need our attention right now. And I think as leaders in the workplace, we have to recognize that this is everyone's going through this, right? Like, it's not just me as the leader having these problems where I'm trying to figure out how to do the juggle of kids and family and work and Zoom calls. It's every single person who also is on my team. And so what are the ways that I can encourage whole leader development so that I can support them to be happier and healthier and thriving, and also to have that flexibility? I call it empathic flexibility, that ability to show empathy in any moment, whether it's on a Zoom call, whether it's, pulling an employee aside for a private call later, but having that flexibility to show up with empathy and say, I'm here and I'm listening, and what do you need in this moment? I really think that is how we have to reconsider traditional systems of work. So one question I would give, if there are leaders on the call managing teams, or even just managing yourself on a team, what did you move in the past year, whether it was a specific task or something in your workload, that you moved to a remote space or moved to a different system, but that isn't serving you well anymore, right? What did you have to pivot, and you maybe move the same process or response that you give a client, and you moved it over here into this remote bucket, but it doesn't work that way. And when we start to do an audit of that in our work, we really can begin to unpack the ways that we rebuild and reframe this new work environment. So that's kind of, again, long answer for a tricky, very tangled process. But I think when we let go of the expectation that we have to separate and begin to look at alignment, we can work each day towards setting an intention to align better.
Wow. I don't know that I've ever heard life audit. And I will honestly now ask myself that, I'm gonna try to do it like once a week. And I'm going to say, okay, life audit this week. What's really important? What needs to take priority right now? And what do I need to push out? And I think that, like you said, we try to take on so much. And then, like Tiffany was talking about, that weighs on our mental well-being, our mental, and like Suzy was talking about, like that, then we want to eat more. We want to, nourish. And so I love that all three of you guys, everything you're talking about just ties in so perfectly together, because we have to life audit what we need in our inner circle, and then what needs to wait, and where do we need help. And so to really outline those boundaries. Yeah. Thank you. Let's move on. Let's go back to Suzy. So like we were talking about, the pandemic took this toll on our health. The abundance of snacks. I mean, I go to the kitchen that's my break, right?
Yeah.
I walk into the kitchen to go fill up my water glass, and then I'm like, okay, I can snack on this. So the lack of social stimulation, the temptation of like just a poor ergonomic setup. I've got a pillow behind me, these things can sabotage our health, even if we have the best intentions, like, oh, I'm home, I have more time, I can work out more. But there's so many other things thrown at us now that can get in, be a distraction from taking care of ourselves. So can you talk to us about how people can alleviate stress and be healthy while we're working from home? And then the second part of this is, what tips do you have for people to really invest more in their personal health?
Wow, I love this question. This is awesome. And I just have to say, Chaili and Tiffany, I love all the things, the way that we're dovetailing together. And it's truly an honor to be able to work in a community of health professionals that are really coming alongside and supporting businesses and employees. So that is really fun. As a health coach, I'm also a health coach. Other than cooking, I also help individuals. And one of the things when overwhelm starts to set in that I like to do an exercise is just it's called clearing the decks. And so with that, I think it really goes along with the life edit. I think that's a perfect, Chaili. But it's just a little bit of a different take on that, where just do a brain dump. Think of everything that, just actually get it down on paper, all of the things that are bothering you or that are taking up space in your mind. It's amazing how many things there are, from, kids and work and school and, trying to keep our health online and all the changes that are happening. Just write those down. Maybe it's just a family relationship. Maybe, who knows what it could be in your brain. Maybe it's that you've heard a health fad and you feel like you need to, go and buy this new supplement or something. Whatever it is, just jot it down. And then you can go through and do an audit, like Chaili, kind of like Chaili was saying. Is this something that I can deal with? Is it something that I really want to deal with? Is it something that I can maybe hand off to somebody else, that I can assign this to somebody else? Is it somebody else's business? Or is it something that, it really isn't anything that I have power over? And I think going through that exercise, so that's just one thing that I like, and I thought I would mention that in there. As far as some other just ways that people, some tips, I think also, like you mentioned with the snacking and the mindless eating, one just really practical thing that I like to do, you see the fruits and vegetables behind me. I like to have a snack tray, kind of like a nibble tray. And you can get this going if you're working remotely or you're driving around. It's something that you can take with you portably as well. But just take bits and pieces of fruits and vegetables and a few nuts, healthy things that you have that are generally packaged in their own packaging, if you will. So they're not prepackaged things. If you can just kind of cut those up, put them on a board and just have them out. I love, Chaili, that you mentioned that you've got these little snacks prepared for your kiddos. And that's if you put those into a muffin tray and have them sitting out, that's great when you have little kids. So that's kind of a practical, just little bit of advice. Another practical bit of advice that I personally do, it's kind of over in the corner, so I won't go and try and grab it, but I have a package of mints that are healthy mints. They're all natural mints, but I will pop those in my mouth, because you can imagine cooking all the time. Oh my gosh, I could be really tempted to just eat and eat and eat all the time. And so that helps keep me on track. So maybe if you just have something in view, get your water glass, have some infused water, that's always helpful. And then the last idea that I wanted to share is just to think about, we all invest in, or most of us, we at least try to invest in an IRA. We try and plan for our future, for our retirement. I want people to plan for their retirement account for their health. So IRAH, your retirement account for your health, for your individual. And so as you are setting your intentions and, thinking about these things, keep in mind where you're going in the future and how, what you need to do for your body. And sometimes having that vision of where we're going, that is enough to just kind of set us on the right path. So that was just another little thing that I wanted to throw in there.
You're so right. I mean, we do try through our lifetimes and through, especially we're working so hard, we try to financially save. So how can we think about saving for our health and living longer, and not only living longer, but living and feeling good when we're much older? And so if we start doing those things now,
Exactly.
map it out. I love that. Awesome. Thank you so much, Suzy.
Oh, you are so welcome. Yeah.
Would love to shift it back to Tiffany. So here's those questions I was going to get back to you about. So loneliness, grief, emotional, mental health, maybe invisible in the workplace, but they're real. So sometimes employees don't want to share that with their manager, which is completely understandable. But most often we're going through something. And people must be acknowledged and supported at all times. And so according to 2 studies done by the Business Group on Health, people are interested in using mental health services more. And so like meditation or stress management or even apps. So I have a couple questions for you, Tiffany. One, what resources are available that people can take advantage of? And then something, again, near and dear to me is like, how do we continue removing the stigma of mental health? How do we make it more comfortable to talk about these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll do the removing the stigma, because I think that's something that we have always, it's like $1 million question in the mental health field. I will say this conversation is shifting. I think a lot has to do with what's been going on in 2020. But it has been disheartening seeing the overwhelming demand for mental health services in a way. But I do think there is a silver lining to it, and hopefully greater destigmatization surrounding mental health issues. And I think this is mostly in part due to the negative experiences that we all had to go through with COVID and quarantine, and that we are going through. But not only that, I think there's been an array of social and political strife that we witnessed in 2020. And I think as a result, the conversation is shifting and changing about mental health. I still think we have a ways to go. And we know that fear and misunderstanding is really what breeds stigma and prevents our society as a whole from viewing mental health as a health issue. And the stigma is very pervasive. It prevents people from reaching out for help is the biggest thing. We've seen studies as far as like 40 to 50% of people don't reach out for help because of the stigma. And so some of the ways that I think that we can address this issue is education and showing people how common mental health issues is the biggest thing. I can guarantee if I took out my depression checklist, everyone on this call probably experienced pretty, I would say, subclinical or clinical symptoms of depression during this pandemic. And I think if we go back to the previous question about the signs of mental health, you see that it really is a health issue, but we don't treat it that way because you can't see it, but it manifests through all of these physical symptoms that we have. So I think another part of it too is there's a lot of shame with mental health. And so people tend to internalize it. And I think we need to do the opposite, which is we need to externalize it. And meaning that you are not your mental health issues, right? It's not schizophrenic people, it's people who are struggling with schizophrenia. It's people who are struggling with depression and anxiety. And I think there's a way that we can start to view this as not an internal issue, but it's an external issue. And I think some of the things that we can also do is in the workplace. I think before it was a stat that said we spend 80% of our time at work or working. And now if you really think about it, we spend 100% of our time at work because a lot of us are working from home. And I think the workplace is a really interesting area that we can start to tap into, and FitPros does a really good job of doing this, but being aware of the work culture attitudes. And I think people having very poor work-life balance, and this comes from this narrative that people are often commended for not using their PTO. People are commended for working really long hours. And so I think we need to be careful where this is coming from and how we've internalized these narratives. It's kind of this idea that like I should just be able to work, and I should never have moments of times in rest and relaxation or utilizing family and vacation time. So I think that's also really important. Another thing is when we're normalizing mental health, we need to start creating spaces for check-ins. Like in your business calls or when you're on a meeting, just check in with people. How are people doing? And I think before the pandemic, it was so commonplace for us to just say, I'm doing okay. But nowadays, if you ask someone that, you're like, really, you're doing okay in the pandemic? You know, we really check in with each other, like, really, how are you doing? I haven't heard from you in a while. How's everything been going on? I think this is changing the dialogue that we have about mental health. I think the other part is the physical and nutrition that we've all been talking about here. Suzy's been talking about this a lot. I think reframing physical and nutritional health, not as something that we just do to manage our physical health, but it's something that we do to manage our mental health and incorporating it that way. And I think what we can see at work, because I think work is a very unique place to tap in, specifically as people are working from home, is I think the workplace needs to do a better job of implementing stress management programs, you know, spreading awareness, having a mental health day or mental health week awareness. And if you don't know, just October 3rd through the 9th is the mental health week, awareness week that we'll have. And I think PTO and sick time, people usually use these to attend doctor's appointments, sick time. I think we need to make this more clear that this time can also be used to attend therapy appointments. And I think therapy, if we're looking at it from a holistic approach, mental health is not just about going to therapy, but it could be going to acupuncture, seeing your nutritionist, you know, having a mental health day. I always tell my clients, you should have a mental health day every 6 to 8 weeks, where you just have a mental health day. It means I don't have anything planned, I don't have a doctor's appointment, but I just have a mental health day for myself. And I think that's really something that people will have to start incorporating. But I think it starts in the workplace by having those conversations there so people don't feel a lot of stigma and shame with that. And I think, Lindsay, the other question you wanted me to kind of touch on is resources. Like, what resources are available to people? And to be honest with you, 2020, there's been a lot of bad stuff, but there's been some cool things as far as mental health that has forced the mental health field to grow exponentially. And it's not just about hiring more clinicians, it's really about relying on innovation and creating resources that goes beyond just face-to-face therapy. And I think with this, it's really reaching a very wide, diverse audience of POC, but also of age group too. So with the digital age, a lot of these resources I'll talk about, you can get access through the internet. There's through an app. So I think these are really important ones. One is your EAP. Most employers nowadays have some kind of employee assistance program. I will say some of these programs can be pretty limited as far as how many sessions you can get, but check in and see if you can get 5 sessions. It's a really good start. And from there, that therapist can help get you to branch off into maybe another resource. But an EAP program, they're usually pretty free. I think that can be the first one. Second thing, virtual therapy. I would have never guessed in 2019, I would be doing virtual therapy the way we're doing it. And I'm doing 99% of my work. The great thing about that is usually I would see people from a 20 to 30 mile radius because they needed to come into the appointment. I am seeing people all over California. So we're just reaching people that I would have never been able to see before. So I think really taking advantage of virtual therapy, but nowadays I've been encouraging clients who are having difficulty finding therapy, open up that zip code. Like you can see someone in SoCal if you want to, and that really opens it up because there's such a demand for therapists out here. If you're someone who's a little bit shy, you're like, I don't want to do face-to-face or virtual therapy, there are apps now that do chat therapy. BetterHelp is another really big one that I've heard really great things about, that people can go online and they can just chat with the therapist when they want to. Some people might be like, oh, it's not my thing, but for others, it might be a really great way for them to do it. There's a lot of meditation and mindfulness apps, Headspace, Calm app. YouTube has some free programs on there and stress management programs. There's also support online groups. I know people are typically used to AA, but there's a lot of different therapy groups that people can find online, and everything is you don't have to worry about going in nowadays. You guys can just like hop on a virtual call and you don't even have to have your video open, which is kind of nice for a lot of people as well. So I think these are some of the things that people can start to kind of get access to and utilize. But I think one place we can start to have these conversations is at the workplace.
Wow, Tiffany, so much great information there. Oh man. I'll just go with the last things you were just saying is like that group support is so important. And I know one of my colleagues, she started Kelly's on the chat here, but she started a wellness group with a bunch of friends in the industry. So like they're, people that have common work experiences, but they just needed a place. They needed a place just to chat with people that they have something in common with. And like you brought up AA. Like those people have a common ground, right? And so they have something to talk about that's familiar, but typically in AA meetings, you just talk about life or what's bothering you. And so I think that these group sessions, I think are really, really important. And because sometimes there's things we don't want to talk about with our friends, but like you said, now you can get a therapist anywhere. And so that is another beauty. And it ties back to what Suzy was saying is like the virtual world has just really set us up for doing things all over and connecting with people all over the world. That's one thing I love about when, COVID hit, FitPros had to take everything we were doing on site and inside of companies virtual, but this is going to be part of our business forever now, because now, companies headquartered in San Francisco, the teams weren't able to connect with their colleagues in Europe, but now they can constantly. We'll do a health talk at 8 a.m. so that people in Europe can still join. And so like, I really believe that this has just opened up so many opportunities. I want to ask you all a couple questions here. So this is going to be like a free for all. Feel free to jump in and really spontaneous. So we had a couple questions come into the chat here. So what can people do to help manage their stress before burnout? So before that, before we hit crisis mode, before panic sets in, and I'll just share one thing that works for me, and then I would love for you guys to jump in, is gratitude lists. And so, of course, I always, we all say like, oh, I should do that more often, but it helps me so much. When I do it, I pull out just a journal and I write down 3 things, sometimes up to 10 things that I'm grateful for. And it just flips my mood. So I'd love to hear what you guys, some tips that you have.
I'll jump in really quick. So mental health is definitely not my place of expertise. So I will defer a little bit to Tiffany and Chaili on that. But Tiffany, I just want to say thank you so much for kind of bringing that whole shame just topic to the workplace here. My hope is that through these virtual, us working virtually and all the changes that have happened, that people will be able to take that mental health day or well-being day instead of waiting to have a sick day. Let's have a wellness day. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Tiffany for bringing that up. I think that's so important. And heading off at the path, like our participant asked this question, gosh, we just don't want to get to that place where things are so bad. So listen to the warning signs, take your mental health day, do, the breathing and the mindfulness and all that. But I'm curious to hear what you all have to say about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is not waiting for a problem to show up, like where you already feel that burnout. So one of the things I do with any client I meet, no matter what their problem or issue is, I always tell people we have like an emotional gas tank, right, throughout our days. Like we have daily stressors with work, friends and family. And whenever we fill up that gas tank, we are able to meet that stressor. But if I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating right, I'm not taking care of my physical health, I'm not reaching out to friends, I'm not, taking medications that are properly prescribed, all of a sudden I deplete that resource. So I think the first and foremost thing that people need to do is I always tell people we should have 3 to 5 behaviors that you do every single day that make sure you can get through your day, right? And so some of these might be making sure I get 8 to 9 hours of sleep, making sure I'm not going too long without eating, and I'm not relying too heavily on sugar and caffeine, making sure I have some kind of physical activity in my day. It doesn't have to be going to the gym. We can't even go to the gym right now, but it could just be going for a walk, going outside for 20 minutes and getting a little bit of sunlight, which has been shown when you have 20 minutes of sunlight or just being outside, it actually decreases your cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone. So figure out what are the 3 to 5 behaviors that you need to do every single day to take care of yourself. It doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it all the time, but if you're making a habit of just having these set intentions, I think that keeps burnout from even coming up as quickly, and people being able to address it.
And I want to chime in. I love that, Tiffany, because even when we look at all of that at a personal level, for any leaders on the call, if you're working organizationally and trying to help encourage this with your teams and your employees, this is where like Tiffany's saying, you have to start at the root of all this, right? Like you have to build in those daily habits. We have to do that organizationally as well, because often we won't catch an employee hitting burnout until they're completely burned out. And that's not healthy for anyone or safe for anyone. And so how do we set up systems and structures so that we're checking in along the way? I talked about workload intensity being one of the number one ways an employee burns out in the workplace. And so how do we help create cultures where we're checking in on workload intensity well before the project is at overload and is imploding, right? So how can we as leaders check in and be asking those simple questions of, how are you doing with this project? What does your workload look like? Is there anything you need? Do I need to make a connection for you? Do you need resources? Do you need a certain level of wisdom from somebody else? Can I connect you to the right person to finish your job well? Like those are all questions that if we begin to normalize those in one-on-ones with our teams or in team meetings as a whole, then we look at this idea of assistance, of help, of support, of providing enough resources as part of our organizational culture and have an opportunity to help mitigate that burnout that could happen later. And so it's really, again, normalizing that question of how are you doing? So often when employers or leaders are looking for help and they're like, well, how do I know if mental health is an issue? And they're so afraid of saying something wrong in the workplace, right? That's like the number one thing where leaders were like, I'm afraid to check in on their mental health because I don't want to offend them or I don't know how to go about it. And it's not so much catching it in the moment, it's creating a culture of checking in on people even on their good days, right? Checking in consistently so that you recognize when they're having an off day. And you can say, I've noticed that things have changed. I've noticed that you're showing up late to work. I've noticed all of these warning signs that Tiffany talked about early on in the call. As a leader, when you begin to notice that, it then is your responsibility to check in. And when we're talking about well-being from a holistic perspective within organizations, within our homes, within our friendship circles, like we have to look at this as a responsibility to look out for one another.
100%. Yeah. And I think, one of the things at FitPro is that we started to do, we've always been a remote company. And so, from day one, I always tell the team that I work my best when I have the freedom to think. And so like, sometimes that's going out for a walk. Sometimes it's going to acupuncture in the middle of the day or getting my hair done. And so I tell the team the same thing, like, you guys go take care of you, whether it's during the workday or not. Like, I know, I trust you guys. That's the biggest thing. It's like, I have faith that you'll get the work done. So do you when you need to do that. And so I think that that's another thing that corporations are having to really have faith in their teams that they'll get the work done. I had a really great question just come in from Holly here. How can I help someone else take the necessary steps to help themselves? So, for example, when I see the burnout starting with a coworker, a friend, a family member, how do I steer them towards taking care of themselves without being codependent, yet giving them some support, right? So does anybody want to take that question on?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. I think I hear this a lot sometimes when I work with parents or people who are in couples and they're noticing maybe their partner or someone else around them is starting to struggle. One of the things I say is like model. Like I'm always like, well, how are you treating yourself? How are you taking time off? And then the other thing is can be being vulnerable and sharing some of the things that you're going through. So sometimes we want everyone else to like open up or everyone else to take a day off, but sometimes we have to model that. And by us modeling it and opening up that conversation, it allows other people to feel more vulnerable. And I think the second thing that you can do is just send people resources, right? I think sometimes we can't expect people to always do what we expect to do, but all we can do is give them resources, be vulnerable, listen, be a really good listener is always important, and also make sure that we're modeling how we're taking care of ourselves too. And then expect other people to kind of chime in and listen and hopefully take note. But sometimes we can't always help everyone in that way.
Yeah, Suzy or Chaili, did you have any other things to add to that one?
Those are great tips, Tiffany. I love that. I think that asking questions is just a really good way that can, bring out help people to feel, and like you said, be vulnerable yourself, tell about, the challenges that we've had. And one thing, the great equalizer of all this is that everybody's life has been shaken up. So we're kind of, everybody has, there's nothing taken for granted now. Just a little bit on another twist to that might be more preventative into that is, I think, doing things as a team, doing, whether it's like a team challenge, like maybe we're all going to be doing this class, or we're all going to be doing this fitness thing, or just opening these things up to where there can be some connection, I think can sometimes help that isolation and help people to feel supported, and maybe be a little preventative towards those things.
Definitely.
Yeah. I was going to say, Suzy, that was great when you talked about doing something together. I was going to say accountability seems to be the number one thing that we need in self-care, often, because we are trying so hard to also prove ourselves in some way, right? I think when I see people who are close to burnout are often high achievers. They're people who really are good at what they do and do a lot. And so that's when they're getting closer and closer to that line, that really fine line of burnout. And so I think that accountability piece, and it's like Tiffany was saying, listen, to be a really good listener of where they're at currently, and then follow up, like that accountability piece of, it's not just hearing them in that moment, but how do we then follow up? How do we remember to, especially in the workplace, leaders, like how do you remember that, whether it's keeping like a journal of something that people said in a one-on-one that you follow up a couple days later, hey, I remember when you said this, I wanted to check in, right? And what does that look like now? Where are you going now? And having that accountability piece, knowing that you as a friend or as a colleague or coworker might come back and follow up, holds people accountable to the things they say to you, right? When they're like, well, okay, I'll make that doctor's appointment, or I'll go get my hair done, or whatever that self-care moment looks like, when then you as that friend and colleague are checking back in and providing follow through in your follow up, there's opportunity then to really be in that journey with them. And that connection and belonging in that process is all a part of that role modeling that Tiffany was talking about.
Super good point, Chaili.
Absolutely. And Tiffany was talking about Mental Health Week in October, which is a global week. And then there's also May is Mental Health Month. And so last year, FitPros rolled out our first ever campaign around breaking stigma and emotional fluency. And we had a bunch of our amazing teachers and speakers and friends and family contribute videos and blogs of things that they do to help them feel better. And so this year we're doing something similar. It's called it's a resiliency challenge, Road to Resilience, and it will be a daily challenge for the month of May. So we're going to encourage people to more details to come, but it will be something we want people to feel socially connected, which is what you guys were just talking about, is like, how can we keep our friends and family accountable? How can we keep ourselves accountable and just stay connected? Because even though things are opening back up, there's still a lot of separation. There's still a lot of staying from home. And so I think our challenge, it will be one thing that we'll put out, but I think there are many other options. I don't know if any of you panelists know of any ideas of where people can find community resources or groups. And if you do, maybe chime in or put in the chat anything that comes to mind. But in just a moment, I am going to go around and have each of you give one last final thought, one thought in closing. But a quick final thoughts. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed things indefinitely. Adding technology and virtual programming, incorporating mental health support, and promoting healthy lifestyles will keep us engaged in our well-being efforts from here on out, I really do believe. Perhaps the most crucial thing to remember during all of this is that everyone is in this together. We're all going through something at some point. Your family, your friends, your coworkers, and even that neighbor down the street who's always, winning yard of the month or has a bunch of trash in their yard. They've got stuff going on too, but in general, we're all facing challenges. And so although we might be isolated from each other now, we aren't alone. And so, you've got us here at FitPros. We've got a ton of free resources that we'd love to share with you. So anybody, please feel free to email us at hello@fitpros or visit fitpros.com and send us a note on, how we can give you guys some free resources. And then of course, we've got amazing speakers like you've heard today. Tiffany, Chaili, and Suzy are all speakers and teachers with us. And so we've got an amazing roster of people across the country doing different things, from magic shows and puppet shows and fitness classes, all awesome things we'd love to bring to your employees. So one last, I'm going to turn it back over to each of you now. And so would love just a final thought in closing, you've given so much amazing advice today. So maybe in like a sentence or two, how would you sum up this topic of, emerging wellness and taking care of ourselves at home, and just, how can we take this going forward? So I guess let's go back up to the top. So Suzy, you kicked us off today. What are some closing comments you've got?
Oh gosh, ask a speaker the closing comments to boil it down to one. I've got to at least boil it down to two. I would say, first of all, your first wealth is your health. Take care of your health, take care of your employees' health. If we don't have our health, nothing else matters. That's just very, very important, I think, for us to take away and keep that, just keep that focus there. But I love this quote. It's actually an Oprah Winfrey quote, and I sometimes I end my cooking demos with it, but you have a gift that only you can give the world. And I just want to leave everybody with that. Just value yourself, value the gift that you are, and take care of yourself. There's so many great, I love the FitPros website as far as resources go. So I'm so thankful to be here, be a part of this, and please reach out if you need anything.
Chaili, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I just want to say for those of you organizationally, as you're considering this as emerging trends in well-being in the workplace, know that it's here to stay. I think 2020 accelerated the direction we were heading to prioritize well-being with our employees, with our teams, in our workplaces. And so know that this conversation that we just had is a springboard for where you will hopefully continue to go. And a lot of the innovation that organizations have shown up with in the past year, that is a springboard. That's the start. And so continue to think creatively and innovatively for how we can support happier and healthier workplaces, because we're just starting to unlock the potential that we have to build really happy and healthy work cultures.
Beautiful. Tiffany, take it away.
One thing I would say, you are bombarded, you got a lot of information today. And so sometimes people can get very overwhelmed with all this information because they want to improve their mental health. They want to do better. So one thing that I would say is start with something small, one intention, one thing that you learned today that you're like, I want to incorporate, and just focus on that one thing. Sometimes if we make too much changes because we want to do so well, it can actually set us up for failure. So I would just say, like, you've got a lot of information today and probably things that you have already been hearing about. Just start with one thing and focus that and make that be your one intention for a week and just see how that goes.
Brilliant. Wow, you guys, this was fantastic. I'm so grateful that each of you took time out of your schedule, and for everyone tuning in. Thank you, Chaili, Suzy, Tiffany, for joining us today. you guys are so appreciated by us. Special thanks to Ashley Bramble on the Fit Pros HQ team for putting this amazing panel together, and a wonderful topic that is so critical. So thank you, everyone. And please, again, if you have questions or comments or want any of these phenomenal people to come speak to your employees, email us at hello@fitpros.com and visit fitpros.com, and we would just love to support you. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
You guys.